Disinterment, stop work immediately. Call local police immediately. The reason why? Remember, you may have found a murder victim. Don't be an accessory to a murder. Okay? Call the Tennessee Department of Archaeology. They must be notified by law. And there's their number there. There's my buddy Phil Hodge, who's also on the cemetery committee. If you see intentional disinterment, call the local police immediately. Get them out there. And if they won't go, call me. I'll get them out there. TCA 68550A, disinterment and reinterment. This is in the health department's part of the code. Just goes to show you how confusing everything is. 68550A, authorization for disinterment and reinterment in cases of movement of cemeteries or parts of cemeteries for reuniting families shall be required prior to disinterment of a dead body or a fetus. So, that means not only do you have to go through TCA 46.4 and all those processes, but you also have to notify the health department. 68508B, such authorization shall be issued by the state registrar to a licensed funeral director or person acting as such upon proper application. In other words, you can have an archaeology company or a funeral home relocate the grave. Those are it, because they're licensed. We suggest that you can use funeral homes for graves after the 1920s, but if it's 1920s or before, we suggest archaeology companies. I have a whole huge list of them. So here's this mystery, Walter Hines versus the state of Tennessee, which a lot of people look at it and they say, well, that's from 1911, so it must not apply anymore. Wrong. It does apply. In fact, it has been used as precedent all across the country in different states. In fact, the United States, the federal government refers to it often when it goes to the Supreme Court. So, it says it's not technically a state statute yet. There are parts of it that are. It defines interested party rights. It says a interested party who, for lack of a better term, is family members or others, but they have the right to maintain, repair, and beautify a cemetery. I don't know what beautification is. I have a situation recently where somebody doesn't like the kind of flowers that another family member is putting in the cemetery, and I can't do anything about that. Okay? I'm sorry. You know, it's like, anyway, it's been kind of driving me nuts because it keeps coming up over and over again, but, bless you. The family members have right of visitation, and it's perpetual to the end of time. They have the right of burial, which is perpetual to the end of time. That's why I always tell landowners, if you don't want people to keep being buried on your property, what I would do is I would get that cemetery tax exempt off, and that's the boundary of the cemetery, and if there's nowhere else to bury them, they can't bury them. That's what I always suggest to them. Yeah.
Right of visitation. What if they have to walk across somebody's private land?
They have the absolute right of visitation. Access from the nearest road is what Walter Hines
So they
versus
don't
State
need
says.
permission in advance.
They don't need permission. I suggest permission because somewhere I have a picture of a gun. One of my jobs is I really try to, and y'all can call me all the time, if a landowner is giving you problems, if a family member is giving you problems or whatever, I really try to get people together and say, hey, look, this is the law, and so let's figure out how we can work together peacefully to get the rights of the landowner and the rights of the family members all met. I do that a lot. I've even had to stand on the front porch of a landowner and tell him that he couldn't block it once. And he didn't shoot me, so I was glad. It also, it declares a cemetery as a cemetery forever, unless you go through the process in Title 46.4. This picture up here, and this may raise its ugly head again, but this is an example in Cheatham County where there was the Belltown Cemetery, and it's an African American cemetery, and somebody bought the property and they got mad, but well, they say they're not racist, but they just didn't like certain people coming out to the cemetery, and so they started blocking it, and it turned into a big thing. They actually the family members won a big suit on it, and now it's, apparently they're having trouble again, so we'll see what happens.
Is there anything about, and I'm just gonna be hypothetical, if a family goes out there and makes a lot of noise and has a party or whatever and disturbs the peace kind of a thing?
That is a different story.
Okay.
That is, yes, that is, if they're out there carrying on, matter of fact, I had a situation recently where somebody was mad because next to a cemetery, somebody had a bunch of chicken coops. And I was like, well, you know, the guy can have the chicken coops, but if they're interrupting your religion, like if you're burying people and it's interrupting stuff, that's something you need to go talk to your locals about to say, hey, these guys' chickens are messing up our funerary procedures. And the fact of the matter is, anything that has to do with the cemetery, it is considered religious. If Decoration Day, it's religious. Going out to see your dad in the cemetery, it's a religious act. And there's something called the First Amendment of the Constitution that protects that. I remind attorneys of that too sometimes. It's kind of fun. Sure you don't want to... A landowner cannot obstruct interested party visitation, and that includes the little clever ways that people do sometimes, like they sort of do these little things that don't look intentional, but you realize, oh, well, now the 80-year-old people can't get there. Can't do that.
You can have a gate up to on the
You
road.
can, as long as you
It's
as long as you have
accessible, not
access.
locked.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I mean, it can be. I mean, it can even be locked as long as you put a sign there and say, "Please call us, and we'll give you, you know, if you're a family member needing to get to the cemetery." And that's what I suggested the poster child guy did, and it works. I mean, the thing is that's one of. I mean, yeah, okay, you can go and sneak on there if you want to and do all you want to, but you know, probably not a good idea. Always say contact the landowner anyway. Sometimes I'll even help you get in touch with them. And if the landowner is resistant, then I'd be meaner. I like to be mean, so don't make me mean. So a landowner cannot desecrate. This means plowing up headstones and using land for something else. A cemetery is a cemetery is a cemetery is a cemetery is a cemetery. It is not a cattle grazing field.
Just gotta ask, you can't bridge a cattle.
And what's even worse is if you have it to be tax exempt and you're running cattle through it, that could be considered a commercial venture in a tax exempt place. That can pose some different problems. If you call somebody like me and I say, hey man, why don't you try looking at it this way? Call them and say that. And trust me, I'll do it. Other relevant precedents, and I can send these all to you, but Davis versus May confirmed the right of ingress and egress, and that was in Texas. McCoy versus Barr, county employees are granted easement to maintain a cemetery. So that goes to show you, your county may not want to maintain the cemeteries in the county, but by gosh, they can. But it's expensive, and which is why counties don't like to do that. I'm just,
Are they obliged to do it, or is it an optional thing for them?
it's optional. They do not have to. They're trying, in Wayne County, they've got a program they're working on trying to get the county to do everything, and the county is all on board. I'm very anxious to see how it works, because they're really excited about it. Rhodes versus Nicholas, Missouri, 1981. Relatives are granted the right to restrain an owner from interfering with a cemetery's purpose, i.e. you can bury. Yes?
So in my hometown, they're having some difficulties with the cemetery not being kept up to standard, like trash overflowing and stuff. Are there any laws or anything about that?
No.
Could you
A
work on
landowner
that?
does not have to, that's the thing, is what is the landowner's duty to protect the cemetery? What does that mean? Does it mean he has to build a fence? Not if he's not running cows around there. If he is running cows around there, he probably should. Technically, building fences and things like that is up to the family members. Maintenance, yes, it irritates family members. I had a situation in Rutherford County that's still being mediated where the guy got mad because a tree was not maintained and fell on his chicken coop. I don't know why chicken coops keep coming up. But he got mad and went in there and cut down all the trees in the cemetery, and that was a crime. And once he realized it was a crime and that the Rutherford County was getting on to him, he was like, oh no, I must make good now. So now he and the family members are working together to try to, fix the situation. He realizes he did wrong. Now, what should you do if a tree's about to fall on your chicken coop and it's not your cemetery? File a nuisance claim. Because what'll happen is if somebody doesn't come out and do something about the tree, the court will give you the ability to do that. But please don't put heavy equipment in a cemetery. Do it with care. Stoker versus Brown, Tennessee, 1979. A cemetery area is the same as it ever was, even though it miraculously shrank. I'm working with one of these in Carter County right now. The cemetery seems to have miraculously shrank, and the place where the rest of the cemetery used to be is now a pasture. Haven't gotten the GPR yet. They're still writing the report, but I mean, if it says that there's a cemetery out there, all of a sudden it's a cemetery, and whoever the landowner is who shrank it, or whoever shrank it, is going to not be happy. So, why can't I plow up a cemetery? It's my land! Well, it might not really be yours. Call the Register of Deeds and confirm, or call me, I'll help. Even if it is yours, you still must leave it alone. So there, see TCA 46A.
So
Yep.
Grant, if I have a cemetery and, I have land that's like a acre and a half.
Mhm.
On one corner, there's a half-acre cemetery.
Yes.
But I own the land.
Yes.
Okay.
You own the cemetery.
That I own the cemetery. Okay.
You do not own the graves or the headstones.
But I own the cemetery.
But you own the cemetery. The graves and headstones are considered, they are looked at as purchases by the family members.
So if
And
I
other
knock
properties of
if I
families.
knock the headstones down, I'm gonna be charged with a class A?
If somebody catches you, yeah.
Okay.
So if the original deed dating back to 1800 said that 2 acres was set aside as a cemetery, is it owned by the landowner that owns the rest of that farm? Because it specifies in there exactly how much is
Well, the
set aside.
cemetery's there,
Right. It's
no
there.
matter what. I mean, if it's been declared, it's there. You can sell a cemetery with here's the thing, like I said, you sell the cemetery, you never sell the graves. And the reason why this is important is because there are commercial cemeteries and they probably pass hands all the time. Just because your family's been buried in a cemetery and another cemetery buys out another cemetery doesn't mean they can come and fool with your graves. Those graves are already done. And that's the same way with a place that's been declared as a cemetery. Now, a lot of these get lost off the deeds over time, and I deal with that all the time. But they're still there, whether they're on the deed
This
or
is
not.
an active family cemetery.
Yep.
That's surrounded by farmland owned by my mother-in-law.
Mhm.
So she does not own that cemetery.
She
Because of the
technically
original
owns,
will.
if the cemetery hasn't been separated as a tax exempt plat and she owns the property, yes, she owns the cemetery, but she never fully owns the graves and
Right.
headstones.
She owns the property.
Yes, absolutely. And
So-
this has happened recently in Memphis where a commercial cemetery guy just walked away from it and the state took over the cemetery, and once the state realized it was gonna cost $800,000 a year to maintain it, they turned it back over to Shelby County for their problem.
So the answer is, when you're selling property, separate the cemetery from the property.
I would, but you know what, just so that you can still have say over the cemetery, make sure that they know that you're still the owner of the cemetery.
Okay.
That way you're getting the tax break, but it's still yours, and if something happens later on, and, if you have to relocate or something like that, you can kind of, it can be your deal.
The problem that I've seen down in Norton County is that there are cemeteries that are next to property, of course they all are.
Yep.
But the cemetery deed, which exists, is
Mhm.
not recorded, or it is recorded, and when you go to the property assessor's map, the property assessor opted not to include it on the map.
Well, that's bad of the property assessor to do.
Because I'm working on a National Registry nomination with an organization with a cemetery, and there is a church, a white cemetery, a slave cemetery, which is a part of the original white cemetery.
Right,
And then there's a black cemetery with the deed, that's recorded, but it's not recorded, it's recorded in the deeds office, but it doesn't show as a separate cemetery on the property.
yeah, and that's because it hasn't been declared that. I mean, basically, the thing to do is get a group together and get in.
But it was, when you record the deed, it's not declared that? The deed is recorded separately.
Does the deed not set precedence?
The deed should set
What I'm
precedence.
saying
Over the
is,
map.
this particular deed, which is an African-American cemetery that was established in the 20s.
Yeah.
That deed, I found the deed, but it's not, and it's at the registrar's office, but it's not in his property viewer's map. So when you go to the property viewer's map, you just see all of this treated as one big piece of property when they're actually two.
Well, guess what? When you go to my database, which is gonna come online very soon, it's ready, I will have that cemetery on the map and they will have no excuse.
Good, thank you.
So what is the liability of the landowner that owns that cemetery? If somebody,
You guys
if
do
you
due
go out and you
diligence.
get hurt,
Well, and that's the thing, and again, if somebody's going out there and they're raising heck, he does have the right to do something.
but if they're just going out there and they fall and get injured,
I
what's the liability? Does it go
I
back
just recently found out that there is no liability for a
on
landowner.
the property owner?
I have a friend who owns property where an African-American church was located and the cemetery. So he owns all of that property. What he's doing right now is having the cemetery surveyed, or the land surveyed. He's gonna separate the cemetery, make it two separate deeds. But he's still going to take care of the cemetery
Yeah.
because his ancestors were the people who started the
Absolutely.
church. So that's the right answer.
Yes, that is the right answer. Now, one situation I've got in Bedford County right now, there was a church that everybody loved, and the cemetery was a part of the church property, but then they decided to set it off, and then they invited somebody to bury their father there, and they did, and now the person buried their father there, and now they want to maintain the cemetery, and it's caused a problem because they don't have a group, they don't have a 501, so they can't keep her from doing that. I mean, basically, the way Tennessee law reads, a family member has the right to maintain the entire cemetery if they want to.
Wow.
So there you go. Here's opening up some civil cans of worms for you. Make sure you get along with all your folks. So, and again, I said, if you don't like it, there's a legal process for relocation. And if these rules make you angry, blame English common law and then also the Roman law. Blame the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, which protects the right of, does not confirm or, You know what the First Amendment says. I don't have it memorized it, but it's the freedom of religion. Thank you. And also blame yourself for purchasing the land before you knew the law. And I deal with this all the time. People get mad. They're like, well, I bought this land. And, and I'll tell a landowner, I was like, did you know the cemetery was there? And if they say no, I'm like, well, guess what? You need to go back and sue the title company. Yep, absolutely. Because I know this cemetery's here. It's in my database. Somebody knew it. And if they didn't practice their due diligence. And I had the nice TCA for realtors who were supposed to do, yeah, I've got all that stuff all figured out. I call realtors and tell them, there's a cemetery on that property, you've got to disclose it. They don't like that, but it's true. And they do once I say. What should I do if I'm a landowner? Follow the law. If you don't, you're going to lose. It's expensive and will take up your limited time on earth. Case in point, my father-in-law, bless his heart, who has my crazy sister-in-law, and he has Alzheimer's. They challenged for some reason he got the idea that when the county closed the road that it was his. But there's another property right next to it. Well, those people wanted to use the property in part to deer hunt on their own land. And it got into this big hole, you can't, that's my road. Well, guess what? After a $5,000 survey and court costs, after $20,000, they figured out that the road was mostly on the other people's property. So, just come on. Be nice. Visitors may be annoying, but try to work something out with them if they request access. I have found a lot of annoying family members from time to time. Sometimes they email me like 20 times a day, and I'm like, okay. Don't just do what you want and hope no one finds out. If you do, interested parties will call me and I'll investigate. And trust me, my investigation, I don't have any power, but my investigation will really annoy you. And the thing is it's kind of like sick and sadistic, because I know all these people. I have these, so much fun. So somebody's going to shoot me someday because of this, but that's okay. I've lived long enough. So for the visitor, be courteous. There are many reasons a landowner is reluctant to have you on his or her property. Trust me, I've been a property owner myself, and I don't want people going and having, raves on my property. But I also have a neighbor that likes to walk my property sometimes, and I let him do that because my property was 120 acres, and his is the only other property at the end of the road. And guess what? He lives there, and he watches the end of the road. So there's a benefit to letting him hang out on my property sometimes. And my homeowner, if he dies on it, the homeowner's insurance covers it anyway, at least the farm bureau. So, yeah. But, just work things out with people. If a landowner is a curmudgeon, be nice anyway and document everything. Get everything in writing. Anytime you've had a phone call, write it down. Because you want to have a track record of this guy being a curmudgeon so that when he does block you and it's time to go, you've got all this stuff. Follow the law. If you don't, you're only going to incur unwanted expenses and penalties. In other words, don't go and desecrate. So, that is pretty much the end, and here's my information if you want to call me. I've got cards too, but I'm running low. They have to order me some more this month. It's probably going to be July before I get them, but I do have some cards. And this is the information. You can write it down, and there's Ernest Tubb at the bottom telling you thanks a lot for because I met him when I was 6 backstage at the Opry.
Graham, too bad you were not here about 10 years ago. I had a friend from college who was trying to bury her mother. The cemetery was landlocked. There was a church and there was a cemetery. The church no longer exists. It was like landlocked, and the guy put a fence, he fenced his property, and he was telling the family that she could not bury a mother in the church's old cemetery. So the one.
Yeah, well, he's wrong.
The one cousin called me from, I think he was in Texas at the time, and I finally got a copy of the Tennessee state laws and sent it to him, and then they were able to get permission to bury their mother with the rest of the family in this church.
Yes, and that is the right, and that's why they've created my position, because now there's somebody you can call.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Just a kind of an obscure question, but say someone they wish to relocate a cemetery, they followed all the proper procedures for doing so. Do you have to sort of reconstitute it as is? Like what, you move the graves, but do they have to be in the same basic position? How does that work?
Well, let's just put it this way, and I'll tell you this, TDA is the poster child for grave relocation. They're working on the Gallatin steam plant right now, and they are actually creating, on another cemetery property, they're recreating the cemeteries they're removing and putting the bodies, the people exactly where they were buried with their exact markers. That's the poster child. That's what people should do. Unfortunately, Tennessee law doesn't say what to do with headstones and things like that, and we've had some problems with some developers in Murfreesboro that have relocated graves, but since the law doesn't say they have to relocate the monuments, they just scatter them. Well, is that practicing due reverence for the dead? Is that, I don't know, let's see. Okay, that's what it says in 46:4, whatever, the fourth section, is it has to be done with care and with due reverence for the dead. What does that mean? I don't know. They should put, that means the markers have to be moved. In other states, the markers have to be moved.
Should be, that's part of it.
But in Tennessee, it's not specified.
Have you had many requests for moving graves in the Spring Hill area? Or can you say?
I don't think in Spring Hill I have. I know that in Rutherford County I've had a bunch. If you go to the state site, matter of fact, they say, oh, it has to be up for so long and then you can file it. I just keep all the petitions up there so people know what's happened. So if you go to the Tennessee Historical Commission website and go to my, the state programs and go to the cemetery program, you'll see all the petitions that have been filed, and I just leave them up there forever.
Okay, one more question. On the tax property viewer thing where you can look somebody up and
Yes.
see what they paid for their lot, if there's a cemetery on that lot, if it doesn't show up on that tax property information, does that mean it's not been recorded, or would it not show up?
Unless somebody goes and says, we want to designate this cemetery as a tax exempt plat, a separate tax exempt plat from the rest of the property, it's still a cemetery. This is what has caused a lot of the problems, is because a lot of people have a cemetery on their property and it's not designated